As Your Heart Betrays You, Part 25. A Miraculous Ladybug Fanfiction written and narrated by Mira Rose. Artwork for the opening and thumbnail image by Evenart Adams on Instagram and Tumblr. You can find her linked in the description box below. If you haven't heard the previous 24 parts, well, you might not know this, but they are linked in the description box, so go check them out if you haven't already. Subscribe, like, all that jazz. Leave a comment if you want. If you don't know what to comment, put Adrien's Garden. Please enjoy As Your Heart Betrays You, Part 25. Adrien Agreste, 23 years old. 4 months. For the first time in, 10 years? More than that? Ever, perhaps? For the first time in his life, Adrien Agreste learned how to breathe. It wasn't easy. The first 3 weeks of solitude made him want to scratch out his brain from the background screaming noise and the constant feeling of swimming through mental clouds. But then, like dawn kissing into day, the fog lifted, the thoughts quieted, and Adrien found himself left with who he'd always been. Himself. Just him. No wants, no needs. Just him, a cheese-hungry gremlin, and a magical talking moth settled on the coast of northern France. He'd taken up gardening. Sure, it sounded silly to admit aloud, but last month he'd planted some lettuce indoors, and now graduated to making a strawberry tower for the porch. Adrien wasn't sure how to plant flowers, or what plants would, kill each other, but he'd fallen in love with the avocado tree he ordered for the patio, and he had to stop himself from overwatering the grocery store plants he somehow couldn't refrain from buying. Green thumb or not, he learned more each day. In this quaint little town, in a small home that sat vacant for 10 years before he bought it, Adrien Agreste began to teach himself what peace felt like. He thought he wouldn't be able to bear life without Ladybug, or that his father's shadow would haunt him no matter where he went. But he was wrong. He lived. He thrived. And this town didn't haunt him like the old city that raised and wronged him. Taylor's song about the lakes and how no one physically saw her for over a year. He understood it all. Even with this newfound peace, Adrien couldn't forget Marinette. Not Ladybug, but Marinette. He had one to-do list item today, and he'd watched a plethora of YouTube videos to prepare for it. Today, Adrien Agreste was going to paint his sunroom. You've never painted on something other than a canvas? Adrien couldn't remember if she'd actually said that, as that conversation happened months ago. But he could picture them, in her living room, her giggle bouncing like an echo in his daydream. He wasn't doing this for her, but somehow she still helped him, even now. If it weren't for the day she teased him, he wouldn't have considered this project. But now he did. He'd picked out the color, bought more paintbrushes than he probably needed, and even bought a jumpsuit to paint in. Sea salt green. That would go nicely in this room with the white trim. And he could pull in his avocado tree when fall's first frost dusted the town. Stroke by stroke, Adrien would paint a new life for himself. A life that honored who he was and celebrated who he would become. 4 months to nip himself into spring, and Adrien couldn't be happier with his decision. This didn't mean there wasn't an aching, spotted chasm in his chest. There was, but he'd learned how to live with it. Turns out, suffering in the name of love isn't noble. Healing yourself after moving on? That was an honor he learned to fight for. He'd be lying if he said he wasn't tempted to go back. He'd be lying if he said he didn't try to go back a month into his sabbatical. Adrien couldn't even make it to the city proper before he had a panic attack, hospitalized by caring strangers before handing out NDAs. The only relief of that attempt of returning was his doctors, who refused to let his management see him for the duration of his stay. Bless them. This was peace, wasn't it? He'd found peace, hadn't he? And yet, sometimes the salt air didn't taste right, and the waves crashed like nightmares when he couldn't sleep until dawn, rusting away his mental health like a metal door. Okay, painter's tape. The video said to use it for crisp lines and to protect what you don't want paint on. Well, that and the tarp. And when he was done, he'd remember to wash out the brushes so he could use them again sometime. He missed her. He missed himself more. That doesn't smell like cheese, Plag yawned, floating over to see what was going on. Adrien exchanged glances with Nuru, who rolled his eyes and shrugged. I'm painting. You're what now? Painting. I'm sorry. I didn't know that was a euphemism for having a stroke. Plag. Adrien shot him a glare. Be nice to your owner. You're not nice to me. A kilo of cheese per day is more than enough. Adrien, I need to eat at least 3 times my body weight to bulk up, keep my strength, be prepared for an attack. You literally weigh less than a Barbie doll. So give me a dream house. Of cheese? The finest. You'll eat yourself out of your tax bracket. Huh? Adrien took the paint key and popped a lid open, looking for the stick a clerk gave him to stir the paint with. Sea salt green. Maybe he'd make those Kingdom Hearts popsicles later. He'd gotten into the franchise on rainy days and found himself to be quite the fanboy. With the exception of Ladybug, Adrien hadn't ever embraced the joy of fandom before now. Sure, he liked brands and series, but it was different. He couldn't explain it, but liking something openly in private was different than liking something privately in public. 2 coats and a soda break later, Adrien washed out his brushes and rollers with the garden hose, satisfied with his work while knowing there was more to do tomorrow. He'd been able to start the trim between coats, and his forearms ached for it. Still, it was his, and he loved it. He loved it, and what was that? Adrien squinted at the shoreline. A man in a turtle costume? Was someone filming a TikTok? Were some kind of conservation video for a nonprofit? Better head inside. The last thing he wanted was the media figuring out where he lived, especially now that he'd started making this place his own. "Mr. Adrien," Nuru whispered, stuck to the lampshade. "Just Adrien, thank you." They were working on it. At least he wasn't calling him Master anymore. "Adrien," Nuru began, coughing to clear his throat. "Mr. Adrien, someone's here." Sweat prickled at the back of his neck like a spray-on sunscreen. Someone found him? "Hide," he said, clearing his throat. The Kwame climbed to the inside of the shade, and Adrien clicked off the light so his shadow wouldn't show through. Plag flew over, tucking himself into his pocket. They knew the drill. Adrien moved to the hallway, the only walls without windows here, and pressed his back to the drywall, knees to his chest as he counted down from 100. It was always like this when someone came by. A rippling terror that he might get washed away from his life on the coast because of a well-meaning neighbor or invitation to church. "Please go away. Please go away. Please go away." "Adrien?" What caused his hair to stand on end? The voice or the name it said? "Nino?" He answered so softly, the walls couldn't bounce his voice. "Adrien, are you in there?" He let his knees slide away. Of all the people to find him, he didn't think... Nino? They hadn't spoken in years. Well, okay, of course they'd spoken, but connected. It'd been years since he connected with him. It was one of the consequences of dumping Marinette. Unless it wasn't Nino and he was hearing what he wanted to hear. Did Adrien want Nino here? Sure, he wanted a friend, but he never allowed himself to make eye contact with anyone for fear of being discovered. He wasn't ready. You can't heal in the same place that hurt you. He couldn't go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "At Noir?" Adrien inhaled sharply, like jumping into a pool or when his driver would tap the brakes. He could feel his tongue against his teeth as he tried to wrestle his thoughts into a sentence. Why couldn't his thoughts be sentences? Nino was Adrien. Cat Noir identity. Figured out when absence. Ladybug. No. When since. Adrien realized he'd forgotten to do the one thing he'd known since birth. Breathe. Okay, breathe. He was guessing. It was a shot in the dark. Besides, both versions of himself, triangle ears and sans leather, were MIA right now. Nino was sure to look for both if Ladybug asked. Right? Both editions of Mr. Blonde came with the Kwame, and she was the guardian. A floorboard squeaked. The door. He hadn't locked the door. Oh, no! He'd chosen the hallway because you couldn't see it when peering through the windows. In terms of hiding or an escape route, however, it was like backing yourself into a fireplace, unsure if there was an ash pit below or a chimney cap above. There you are. Adrien looked up to his old friend sitting down on the hardwood floor, his back against the wall kitty corner to him. How should he answer? Should he answer? Hey.
I like the place. Thanks. Was that an avocado tree I saw out back?
Yeah, it was.
I didn't realize they would grow this far north.
Container.
I mean, in winter, you plant them in a container so you can pull them in during winter. And they don't die?
I hope not.
Right. Okay.
Nino, Carapace, nodded.
Something new every day.
Silence fell, and Adrien fought himself to meet his eyes. Soft, kind, a friendly face. He straightened himself, cursing when he realized he'd leaned into the wall like a model on instinct.
Why are you here, Nino?
Carapace sighed and looked down at his hands.
She's worried, you know.
About Cat Noir?
Yeah.
And Adrien? He shook his head.
Something about finally leaving the public eye.
Right. He could hear the clock ticking in the other room. He'd picked up a little yellow Peanuts clock at a secondhand shop a few weeks back, and that wasn't important right now. He focused on the wrong things. He wanted to focus on the wrong things.
Does she know? No.
Carapace didn't need him to specify. How long have you?
Remember that part-time security job I had? That was, 5 years ago? Just because Kwamis don't show up on tape doesn't mean transformations don't either. All this time? Yep. All this time? Yep. All this time? Yeah, dude. And you never told Alia? Nope. Wow. Tell me about it. Is that the reason why you haven't married her yet? Because you had to keep secrets? Dude!
Carapace threw his shield at him.
Not cool.
He laughed, each chuckle lightening the burden on his chest. Wow.
I'm the best friend ever? Yeah, dude. I know.
You're all right. Carapace looked for something else to throw, then sighed.
I'll tell her you're something.
You aren't here to drag me back?
What, and separate you from your avocado tree?
Carapace shook his head.
No, I borrowed Kalki to find you, and now I'm going home.
Kalki? They could do that? Why didn't they use that for Hawkmoth all those years ago, then?
So she could have found me if she wanted to, then, couldn't she?
Adrien almost forgot this feeling. Almost. Lead in the chest, an ache in his shoulder blades, pain around his eyes, an itchy nose.
Don't start, dude.
Carapace looked away.
Don't start. She's worried sick about you. She's worried sick about Cat Noir.
He bit his lip.
That's on you. What? You're the one who messed that up.
I know. Adrien studied the trim. At least it wasn't his poor handiwork in this room. I know.
You literally broke up with her, then showed up as Cat Noir that night to comfort her. Of course she likes Cat Noir better. I know!
He didn't mean to yell.
I know! I messed everything up, Nino. It's what I do.
He expected an empty silence in response, but Carapace laughed. He laughed, shaking his head.
Oh, man.
Carapace began.
You are out here healing, aren't you, dude? You exploded. Just now, you exploded. At me. But you didn't push away the truth. Man, I am so proud of you.
Proud? How long had it been since someone said that word to him without trying to get in his good graces? Do you want to stay for dinner? The question tumbled out before he could think about it.
Did Plague have something to do with the roof of Notre Dame?
Carapace raised an eyebrow, and it lifted the mood.
Cool. I'll order if you pick up. What, you're too good for delivery now? Is the aggressed generational wealth collapsing now that you've hidden your face?
It'd been a while since he'd gotten a jest in good fun.
I'll tip you like an American. Say no more.
Carapace sprung to his feet, dusting off his booty.
Where am I going?
Heart lighted, Adrien went to the kitchen drawer where he kept his takeout menus, stopping by the lamp to escort Nuru out. The sky bled pink now, perfect for dinner with a friend. Dinner with a friend. Maybe this wasn't a new board after all. Maybe he'd washed his slate, the scratches from use adding texture to the scribe experience. And oh, there was so much he'd bullet-pointed and wanted to share. Thanks for coming, Nino, Adrien said, turning to face his friend. He meant it.
Of course, dude.
Carapace leaned against the wall, as if no time passed at all.
I'm here for you.
Adrien turned his attention back to the menus, fumbling for a burner to place an order with. He never used the same phone twice. Here for him, not Adrien, not Cat. Him. In another life, without this twisted mess he'd woven himself into, would it be this simple? Catching up over takeout and sharing new hobbies? Existing in plain sight? He'd like that. Whoever he'd be moving forward, that's who he wanted to be. Adrien wanted to exist in plain sight, without masks or sunglasses. Thank you so much for listening. There's a reason why I don't write conversations between two men, unless if it's Adrien and Plague. Occasionally I'll do Adrien and Hawkmoth, but we can see why I shy away from it. Girls, boys, anyone in between. Let's not do that again. That was not my best recording session. Oh well, if you're still listening, comment male conversation, because I only have so many talents and that is not one of them. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.